So, without further ado, Brian Callanan has been an award-winning news journalist in a career that began in '96. He's been a news reporter, news anchor, and sports anchor throughout the Pacific Northwest. In his work, he's covered Endangered Species Act hearings, presidential campaigns, Socialist Alternative Party city council members, and everything in between. He's currently working as a public affairs host and moderator for the Seattle channel, which has been recognized as the country's top municipal television station by the National Association of Telecommunications Officers and Advisors for 7 out of the past 10 years. His work combines the objectivity and understanding required for complex political issues like those that we deal with every day, with the innovation and creativity needed for compelling storytelling. He's a 5-time Northwest Region Emmy winner, including Best Host Award in 2014, and was the 2016 winner of the King County Municipal League's Government News Reporting Award. An English and Communications double major from UC Berkeley, Brian provides insights from the rapidly changing, often colliding worlds of media, politics, and marketing. Please welcome Brian Callanan.
Hello and welcome. I want to make sure that got the ticker here, good to go. Thank you everybody for having me here. Thank you to the Tennessee Credit Union League for having me here. It's an honor to be here, I have to say that. Congratulations on your centennial. That's some great news to share there too. And I also wanted to say, I didn't put it in my introduction, but I probably should have. I'm a member of Sound Credit Union in the Seattle area. I've had an account there for many years, and it very much is my honor to speak with you today. I wanted to start by telling you what this is not. This is not a speech telling you who to vote for, which party to support, what legislation you should be pushing for, what laws you should support and which ones you shouldn't. You got plenty of people who are doing that, right? What I'm talking about is something that I think is a lot more challenging, and I really see it, frankly, as something a lot more interesting. Trying to inform you and educate you and maybe make you a little bit more excited about the whole idea of, well, shucks, we talked about the 2 words that are the most exciting words in the English language, and when you put them together, they make the most thrilling phrase in the English language. I'm talking about government advocacy. There was supposed to be a blare of trumpets there, but it didn't exactly work out. Quite all right, quite all right. At any rate, I always like to ask this before I get started out there. Is there somebody who is so excited about government advocacy they just can't handle it? It's the most thrilling thing in their lives. Let me see. Okay, all right. Security. We got to keep an eye out. Keep an eye out for that table back there. I bring this up because, and you don't get to leave early for saying that. Okay, you still got to stick around. I do want to make sure I do check out who is in the room here, though. Let me see a show of hands. Where are my presidents, CEOs? Presidents, CEOs. Okay, got it. Got a few of those. How about some vice presidents? Any of those out here? Cool, okay, got it. Are there some board members from credit unions here? Great, okay. Who did I miss? What other roles are out there? Any other hands in the air? What do we got? Anyone else? Did I miss anybody?
Supervisory committee.
Supervisory committee, thank you. Anyone else? Did I miss? Okay, all right, keep up the good work over there. Thank you everybody for being here. And I also wanted to make sure I checked out, just in terms of the experience that we have in this room, who has hiked the Hill before and gone and talked with a legislator? Okay, let me see some hands out there. That sounds great. Keep them up. Who's done that for 5 years? Keep them up. Who's done that for 10 years? 15 years? 20 years? Here we go. Oh, wait, I missed everybody there. Hang on, we got one gentleman right back here. Stand up, sir. Who are you?
Yeah, Doug Clinton, Coin Credit Union. I started my legislative advocacy back in 2001.
Okay.
So, yeah, 22 years now.
Give it up for Doug. Thank you very much. All right. Doug, I'm gonna be calling on you throughout here, and yours was the crazy table. I'm gonna point that out too. At the very, you know exactly what's going on here. Let me do this. It looks like we've got a little bit of chatter going on in the room. Let me ask you to turn to the table, or you can turn to the table next to you there. I'd like for you to think about government advocacy and think about maybe the top 3 challenges that you go through when you think about this, when you have to deal with government advocacy, what it means for you. I know a lot of people are like, but we have a lot of different people on different stages of this journey of advocacy, and I'd like to try to share some ideas. So let's take 5 minutes, let's think about it, talk amongst yourselves. If you come up with just 2, that's fine, but I want to make sure that I get the juices going here. We have some stuff we need to share. So let's take 5 minutes and start talking about government advocacy and the 3 biggest challenges you face with it, and go. Fire it up. Here we go. Here we go. Talk amongst yourselves. You guys Googling government advocacy? That's okay. Oh, shoot. Okay. All right. That's all right. That's all right. Got it. Thank you. Good, good. Okay. The chatter going there. Taking notes. All right. Good, good, good. Got the pens out. Okay. All right. People are writing stuff. This is good. Thank you, Laura. People are taking notes. All right. Brenda's in charge. That's good. All right. I'm not snooping. There's some good discussion going on here. All right. Great. Good deal.
This place doesn't get very good reviews.
Yeah. Expecting a lot out of you guys here. Okay. All right. Here. This is good.
Does it go on the list after the interview?
All right. Like some good note taking here. Okay. Got it.
That's right. That's good.
All right, let me see some hands out there. Someone have some ideas to share? Are we getting there? People need more time? I think we might have some ideas to share. Think we might be close? I'll give it the 60-second warning here. We'll get it back together. Okay. All right, I think I'm seeing enough eyes up on me right now. If we can bring that chatter down to a low rumble, that would be great. Let me see some hands out there. Who has some ideas about some of the biggest challenges that you endure and you go through when you talk about government advocacy? Who's got a hand out there? Any thoughts out there? Sir?
I think one of the things we talked about was the credit unions are understanding the issue when they go to hike the hill. They know
Yep.
what's going on.
Credit unions understanding the issue. That's a very good point there, making sure you have a better idea of what's happening there. Thank you for that input. Any other ideas out there? Some challenges you run into with government advocacy? Sir? It's Doug's fault. Don't blame Doug. All right. Okay.
Lack of understanding by the legislatures.
Yeah.
They really don't understand what a credit union is, what the issues are, how small we are, how we benefit our members. So having to educate the politicians on those issues every single time that we have to do.
Educating lawmakers. Thank you. That's a very, very good point. Other thoughts out there that we might have? Some other hands out there? Ma'am, I see you.
Think of like the banks just have money, they advocate for us, we advocate to the politicians, but those lobbying dollars are just growing in the banks.
Banks have more money. That's a very good point too, and money talks. There was one other hand right behind you, maybe? Was there?
I was making sure you saw her.
Okay. I see. No, it's good. Teamwork makes the dream work. Nice work. All right, sir?
I'd take the other way to say educate the members and what they can do as credit union members, but also at a time where everybody's hypersensitive to anybody leading them down any path, it becomes a challenge to get your members to understand what they can do.
Educating members, if you didn't hear that part. That's a very important part of the equation as well. Any other thoughts out there? These are all great ideas. Sir?
One size fits all. They create this legislation, and it's for billion-dollar institutions. You get down to 100 million, it's like, how do we implement this? How do we afford it? It does one
Got it. A one-size-fits-all legislation, in case you didn't hear that, and the challenges that sometimes you go through with that type of situation. Some other thoughts out there? Really appreciate the feedback here, folks. Anyone with some other ideas? Sir.
About making yourself known to your legislator on the local level.
Mm-hmm. Yep, making yourself known to your legislator on a local level, that's a super important. Building that relationship, absolutely. That's a super important piece of this. These are all great ideas, and I think I'm going to end up speaking to some of them in my presentation here today, and I want you to keep those in mind as we continue through here, because I think, as I said before, and we saw that in the show of hands, everybody's on a different stage here when it comes to this journey towards advocacy and knowing how to do it effectively. So here's the breakdown for what we're going to do today. Rough agenda is relatively simple. We're going to talk about how we prepare and how we plan for advocacy. That's a very, very important part of this whole situation here. We're going to talk about how you do that effectively and what the pitch looks like. We're going to have a little bit of fun with that, I hope. I'm going to try to get a little interactive there. I'm going to pretend to be the politician. We'll have someone come up and pitch some ideas my way. And then we'll talk about sustainable advocacy and what it takes to keep this effort going, which is substantial. So I guess in terms of this agenda, I hope that makes sense to you. I think it'll be pretty straightforward. But I did want to just kind of start off by talking to you about why I'm here. I know it must seem a little crazy that somebody from Seattle rolled out here to Tennessee, but I really see it this way. I've been a broadcast journalist for 28 years. I've done all sorts of different things, and I've talked to politicians from the local level all the way up to the President of the United States. And I've talked to lobbyists who work at the local level all the way up to the federal level too. And in my experience, what I have figured out there, and talking to people on both sides of this equation, right, I've really figured out that me as a broadcast journalist and you as advocates, I think we're trying to do the same thing. We're trying to tell our story, right? And we want to make sure that story is told accurately and fairly. It's a huge part of my work, and I know it's a big part of your work too. We want to make sure that that story is authentic. It means something to us. We have ownership of that story. It's ours, and we're proud to tell it. We want to make sure that that story is broadcast from the rooftops. We want everybody to know about what's going on with our story. You as credit unions, me as a broadcast journalist, making sure that everybody gets that story out there. And then I think the other part of this that is especially challenging is when you talk about telling your story, it's the idea of making sure our story is not abused in any way. It's not misrepresented. It's not distorted. It's not manipulated in any way. And that's where I really want to dive into an important part of this presentation, which is a little difficult, but it's very important. And I'm talking about information and misinformation. So I want you to take a look at this counter I got going right here. This is going to count up to how many emails are flying around the world every day. Who's got a guess to how much that is? Just yell it out. What do we got? Anybody? A trillion? No, a little high. What else we got? Anybody? A billion? Okay, all right. We'd be here all day and into next week if we kept an eye on this, because we're talking about 333.2 billion emails every day flying around the world, right? And why do they all end up on my inbox on Friday afternoon, right? Yeah, it's now 40 to 70% of them are spam. That's very, very real. Also, with this, it's a situation where these emails that are coming our way, we're taking in so much information that it's hard to process. The estimate is that we're actually taking in 74 gigabytes of information every day, the equivalent of watching 16 movies, right? It's if Doug started watching the Friday the 13th series and then started all over again, right? This is what I'm talking about. I don't even know how you do that in a 24-hour day, right? But 74 gigabytes of information. So it's a lot, and studies have shown that if you actually went back 500 years, a very well-educated person in the Middle Ages there, in terms of reading and talking with people, they were ingesting 74 gigabytes of information over the course of their entire lives. So our brains are definitely on overload. And I bring this up because I think it's very important as advocates, as storytellers, to really know the battleground you're stepping into here. There's a lot to take in. There's a lot of information that people are dealing with, and the lawmakers you're dealing with, they're dealing with a lot of information too. So What it complicates this issue of having so much information sent at us as at a fire hose is this, the issue of media bias and misinformation. It's a very, very real issue here. And I wanted to look at some of the different numbers from what people are saying around the country here. 95% of American adults say the spread of misinformation is a problem. I'm not quite sure what the deal is with the other 5%. Maybe they were misinformed about the question. I'm not quite sure. But I think about misinformation, and I think about its first cousin's identity theft. I think about its sister scams involving the elderly. This is something that the credit unions are dealing with every day. Misinformation is a threat in our country right now. It's a very real thing, and it's important to know about this. 91% of people polled say social media companies are responsible for this information. And with close to 5 billion social media users around the world, it's a very real and powerful force, and not always a force for good. Finally there, 53% are not concerned they have personally spread misinformation. I'm going to put a pin in that for just a second, and I want you to think about that as we move to the next part of this. And I want to talk about misinformation and media bias especially, because this is a very common target, I think, in this discussion here. These TV news guys, they're all idiots, no offense taken, but we really need to put this out here. Every single media outlet is biased. There's no way around it. They are run by human beings, and we all have biases. From our families, from our friends, from our upbringing, it's who we are. And dealing with those and being aware of those is a very important thing to do. I wanted to talk about a few of the different levels of bias that we see in the media. Some are a little bit more easy to recognize, and some are not. Partisan bias. I think we have an awareness of what this is. We're talking about situations where there's a certain political leaning to a newscast, right? I recommend getting your news from a number of different sources if that's possible, and I know that's a lot of work. Then you've got big story bias. This has definitely been part of my work as a live news reporter. Every newscast has to have that live, that top story, right? Here's the biggest thing we're going to bring you, right? And in looking at that, putting that most important story first, I cannot tell you how many times I was called on as the lead reporter of our morning newscast in Seattle to go out there and tell people about half an inch of snow on the ground in the middle of winter, right? I mean, and I know I see some nodding faces out there, and I'm very sorry about schools being closed today. That's not a good situation. And maybe that's some of the bias leaking over there, right? But it was amazing. I mean, it snows in Seattle, true story. But I was that guy, standing out there with a mic in my hand, kicking the snow. And we were trying to tell people that that was the lead story of the day. So keeping these things in perspective is very important. Something else to be aware of is something called negativity bias. If it bleeds, it leads. You might have heard that phrase before. This is something to be aware of as well. Are they going to lead the newscast with some great information about credit unions? Or are they going to talk about a quadruple homicide that's 2,000 miles away? These are things you have to be aware of here, and I think it's important to recognize all these different types of bias. But there's one other important type of bias that is sometimes more difficult to recognize and a little bit more personal. And I'm talking about confirmation bias. You might be familiar with this term. I wanted to throw this slide up here just to give a bit of an exercise here as to what confirmation bias is and what it's all about. You can see these numbers up on the screen. This is a sequence that follows a certain rule, okay? I want you to think about that. You guys are all credit union math wizards, I know, so you're going to figure this out in a second. So I'll ask you this. If you would like to test out another series of numbers, okay, to test out your theory on this, raise your right hand and I'll let you know if you're onto it. If you think you know the rule already, then pop up that left hand and I'll call on you in that way. So let's see some minds working here. And let me know what you think of these three numbers here. What is that rule? If you want to test it out, raise your right hand. If you think you know what that rule is already, raise your left hand. Who's so brave? What do we got? I see a left hand over there. What do you got, sir?
They're powers of 2.
Powers of 2, the man says. That is not the rule. But thank you for jumping in there. Anybody else have an idea? It's not incorrect, but that's not the rule that's at play here. Anybody else? Anyone at all?
You're doubling the preceding number?
Doubling the preceding number is what he's saying. Okay, got it, thank you. That is not the rule either, but thank you for your input there. That's not incorrect, but that's not the rule at play here. Anyone else want to hazard a guess? I'm shooting people down left and right, aren't I? Anyone else have some thoughts here? Don't like the number 6. That's okay. All right. Again with Doug. We got to stop with this. That is not the rule either. I'll call it at that point. I think this is really, really interesting. It's a test that was actually run in the New York Times 8 years ago, and it's kind of fascinating. So the answer, the rule that was actually at the base of this, is something any kindergartner could tell us, which is each number is bigger than the one before it, okay? But here's the whole interesting thing here. A lot of us start with this assumption that, okay, this is going to be a tricky problem. I'm going to figure it out here. Each number is double the one before it, powers of 2, and that's where we make a little bit of a psychological mistake. We don't want to hear the answer no in terms of testing out that theory, etc. Nobody actually said, hey, let me test out some other numbers. Did you notice that? Everybody thought they had the rule figured out already. It's really interesting to look at this. You could have given me some other numbers like 6, 4, 2, or they all even numbers, or 3, 2, 1, just for the sake of trying to test out the theory, but nobody actually did that. And as it turns out, 77% of people who have played this game, more than 3 out of 4 people, did the same thing. They said, I know what the rule is. I'm not going to make a theory or a guess at another sequence of numbers here. I know what that rule is right now. And so in looking at that, I don't think we really want to hear no when we're looking at different issues that are before us here. And so it's a lot more pleasant to hear yes, and this is the whole basis of confirmation bias here. We're not really testing that theory. We're not trying to disprove that theory. Confirmation bias means basically this. We're more likely to believe information that fits our pre-existing beliefs, and we're more likely to go looking for information from sources that fit our pre-existing beliefs. We're not looking to test or disprove what we believe. Our theory on these numbers here, we're just looking for confirmation, right? So dealing with confirmation bias is very important to you. As advocates, it's important to me as a news reporter as well, because if you're not mindful of your biases, if you're not mindful of those blind spots that are out there, there's a really good chance that when you're crafting your story, you're not going to be ready for some of the challenges that come up when you end up telling it. It's an important thing to think about here. And some basic thoughts in dealing with confirmation bias, which is a very important piece with this, and it's not easy to deal with, but the basic thought is this: get comfortable with being uncomfortable. You need to get some different opinions out there from someone you might disagree with. Check out a news source that you might not like. You have to be open to those different opinions. You've got to find some experts who have gathered some evidence. Evidence is very important. Check those credentials. Check those sources. That's a very important part of this too. Stay curious, okay? And please pause before sharing. You don't always need to retweet that, okay? This is something that's very important. I heard a wonderful acronym at a recent conference. WAIT, W-A-I-T, why am I talking? It's something to think about, right? Definitely something to think about. And I know that I'm asking you to do a lot here when it comes to tackling your own personal biases, when it comes to dealing with biases in the media, when it comes to dealing with the flood of information that's coming at us every single day. But when you don't do this, when you don't put in the work you need to do to actually tell your story, what happens? Very simply, I think democracy dies. This is something that I deal with in my work all the time, and I just really believe this, that if we throw up our hands and say, telling my story, owning my story, it's just too much. Well, don't worry. Someone else is going to own it for you. I think that's the big reality here. You might have heard this phrase: if you're not advocating for a seat at the table, you're probably on the menu, right? It's something to be very aware of here, because as a journalist, as an advocate, I think we are all soldiers in this battle. If we're going to avoid something like this, we need to know how to tell our story and how to tell it effectively. So when things are looking bleak, it's usually a good time to make a reference to Johnny Cash. And I did have some music to this one too, but unfortunately, the singing is not going to happen today. That's all right. Quite all right. I just wanted to give you a brief background on where I've been and a little bit more on my story. So I haven't really been everywhere, man, but I have been around the Pacific Northwest working at a number of local TV stations. I started my career at KPIC, which is the CBS affiliate in Roseburg, Oregon, kind of in the middle west part of the state. I was a reporter, an anchor, and editor, and they didn't let me be janitor, but it was close, and I was making $6.25 an hour. I remember doing reports on the poverty line and going, oh crap, you know, it was just, it was one of those kind of deals. Soon after that, I started working for CREM 2, that's the CBS affiliate in Spokane on the eastern side of the state of Washington. And then I started working for Q13 Fox in the year 2000. It's now known as Fox 13 in Seattle. I worked there for more than 11 years as a reporter and an anchor and a sports anchor as well. And then in 2011, I started working for a place called the Seattle Channel. And this is a bit like the Metro Nashville network here in town on Comcast Channel 3. Maybe some people know what it is. If you don't, you're not alone. This is the station that shows all the government meetings, right? Okay. That's who I work for. I work for the Seattle Channel here. And I should point out, I am an independent contractor working for the Seattle Channel. I am not a city employee. I do not speak for the city. They have enough trouble doing that on their own. So, so basically, what's happening at the Seattle Channel, in addition to showing all those meetings, which are a very important part of what the Seattle Channel does, the Seattle Channel has employed me as a public affairs host. So I moderate debates between different candidates for local and state offices. I engage with different public issues of the day, such as should we have safe injection sites for people who are dealing with heroin overdoses? Have both sides of the story come on and talk about it. It's some pretty heady stuff, and I'm dealing with a lot of different issues in Seattle, as you might imagine. I know there's a lot of issues in Seattle and Nashville too, but these are some of the different things that I do. My work is overseen by an Ethics and Elections Commission that's set up by the city. I can never say that I'm unbiased. That is not possible, but I do my best to put together balanced stories. That's a very important part of what I do, and trying to bring in both sides here and really try to tell people what's happening in local government. It's not based on ratings. It's the city's urge to try to get some different public affairs information out there. Also, it was mentioned in the opening, I'm a graduate of the University of California at Berkeley. Are there any other Bears out there? No? That's all right. I wanted to make sure I brought this up. So I was there when we actually had some decent sports teams going on, which is a long time ago. But there I was in the marching band. Loved it. Loved my time at Cal. Go Bears. Yeah. I was not in the marching band when the guy jumped on the trombone. Different. And that was the Stanford band, by the way, and that trombone's in the College Football Hall of Fame. But I was on the field in 1992 when we took care of business in the Citrus Bowl in Orlando, and I just felt like I could share this with some Tennessee Volunteers. Doesn't it feel great to beat Clemson? I mean, yeah, it was, where's Knox? Yeah, come on, you know, it was 30 years ago for me, but it was just a couple weeks ago for you, so I just wanted to make sure I brought that up. Okay, let's jump into this whole concept of preparing for advocacy. So I wanted to talk about this planning part because this is a very important piece of this in terms of reaching out and working what your story is. There's a lot of steps that need to go in before that. Planning is a part of it, political influence building is a part of it, and preparing a pitch is the last part of it here. And I think it's important to think of these steps in this way because you can't just go up to a lawmaker and ask for something, right? You have to build a relationship beforehand. That's a critical part of this. So that pre-planning part, that political influence building part is a critical part of this. But in terms of the very basic issue behind this, it's the idea of figuring out what is your story, right? That's a little more difficult than it might seem, and I wanted to bring up one story that's been going on here in Tennessee that I thought was pretty cool. Is Todd Fortner here by chance? That'd be really cool if he was. Anyway, that's a smiling Todd Fortner over there from the Tennessee Valley Federal Credit Union. Oh, are you guys here?
I'm in Tennessee Valley, yeah, and then we got our supervisor.
Oh, cool. Rebecca, thank you. And thank you both for being here. I really appreciate it. And I might push it a little bit further. Could someone, this is a cool headline, right? They're talking about the Tennessee Valley Credit Union turning into the biggest mortgage lender in that area there, in the Chattanooga area. And so that's some really big news, but I'd love for somebody out there to try to tell me what this story is about. And I can give you 3 sentences, and Tennessee Valley, I know I'm putting you on the spot. Could you try to explain for us what this story is about? And if you only need 1 sentence, that's fine too. What's this story all about?
Well, when we first took that as a personal challenge, we were probably 15th in our market. We were primarily trying to go after Rocket Mortgage, because pretty big task for us.
Yeah, it was. Can we give Tennessee Valley a round of applause? Thank you, John. Yeah. That sounds like a ton of work, and I know it was not just Todd. It was a big team doing a lot of that work over the course of 4 years. He was cracking the whip. Okay, I get that. And I wanted to make sure that I said something here. What John said is not incorrect. That's an absolutely accurate assessment of what went on there. But I would love for you to look at that story from a different lens, from one of political advocacy, if you were trying to tell the story from that perspective. I wanted to try it a different way, and I'll try this on for size. So I would look at the story in this way. Peggy Johnson, I invented a name there, is a homeowner for the first time, and she can't believe it. I owe it all to Tennessee Valley Federal Credit Union, said Peggy, a 38-year-old single mother of 3 who works at Blue Cross Blue Shield. She's one of nearly 2,000 people who took out a mortgage or home equity line of credit in 2022 with Tennessee Valley Federal Credit Union, which established itself as the biggest home lender in the Chattanooga area for the first time ever last year, surpassing Rocket Mortgage. After that, we probably have a quote from Todd, those Rocket guys are chumps or something. Anyway, we would not do that. But I hope you see what I'm trying to do there. I see what you're saying in terms of what this program was about, but I'd love it if you could try to refocus what you're saying to realize that stories are about people, right? It's not about your credit union, it's about your credit union members, right? And reframing it in that way, I don't mean this as a criticism at all, but hopefully something you can build from, John. This is something where I think that you're going to be able to look at this from a different way and tell your story in a different way and shape it in a different way. In my field of visual storytelling, my news directors have called it the pregnant eye structure. So think about this kind of drawing here, all right? So we're focused in on Peggy, right? She's getting some big help from her credit union. And as it turns out, thousands of other people are getting this help. And as a matter of fact, the Tennessee Valley Federal Credit Union is helping more people than ever before, surpassing Rocket Mortgage. And if they're able to help even more people, maybe we could see more happy endings like Peggy had, right? So you start that focus with your one person, that's someone that maybe a lawmaker can really identify with, a problem they can identify with within their district. You broaden it out, you bring in all those different facts you need to lay on people, then you bring that focus on back, right? So you can really talk about that personal story. I think it's a very important way of looking at this. Stories are about people, and they're also about action. I wanted to make sure I pointed that out too. Hitting that message is crucial. You have credit unions that are community-based here. You're reaching people who haven't been reached before in our market economy, and you're bringing them in. That's a super important part of this. So some really good news here, for certain, some positive news here, and I really want to mention this as a very important bright spot here. But the challenge is this: positive stories like this are very hard to come by in the world of advocacy, because a lot of times most industry groups are not able to think proactively, or they don't think proactively, right? They're thinking reactively. And this is something where the government acts, you have to react to try to block something, right? And I'm not saying you shouldn't operate reactively. There's a bill that's coming through. You really need to make sure that credit unions are protected from it. That's very important. But if that's the only thing you're doing, even if you're winning on that 90% of the time, you're still losing ground, right? So working proactively, trying to get stories out like this is crucial. It's critical. If you want to be effective as an advocate, you can't just be against things, you have to be for things. And that's an important part of this. You have to be proactive and craft policies that improve lives or work with some existing policies to expand them and make them better. Okay, so in the planning stage, looking at this, you're going to be developing position statements. You're going to be writing some one-pagers. You're going to be working with your lobbyists and others to try to make that happen, checking it out with your legal department, et cetera. You'll also be developing your story. You're going to be working on those ways you can make it personal, finding out how it will benefit not just your credit union members, but others in the community as well, maybe in the business community, more constituents of the lawmaker you're trying to talk to. And when I talk about political influence here, this is a three-pronged issue too. This is about developing a program to influence who's being elected. That's the very key part of this just from the start. We're talking about looking at endorsements, political action committees. I know your lobbyists are doing this right now. Sarah, thank you for the input that you've given me on this. I know you're doing a ton of work in this department. You're looking for ways to deliver a candidate that is on board with your story. You got to do that from the jump, even before a lot of this other advocacy work happens. Because it all comes down to counting votes. And I think you've heard this before, but if you can get to that 50+1, that's what it's about. You need to know who your lawmakers are, know who supports your legislation, who doesn't, where those swing votes might be, and what the red flag issues might be among the different lawmakers that you're talking to. It's also knowing about what's being tried in other places and what's been tried before. You're looking for examples from other jurisdictions where credit unions are working on these issues already. You could also team up with different community groups or organizations that monitor this kind of activity and create some best practices. A lot of things to consider here before you get to the pitch. And with the pitch, I'd love to bring up, if I could, I think Sarah's my plant in the audience here. Would you mind coming up here? Can we give a big round of applause to Sarah Waters? Come on. Yep. Okay. Maybe grab a microphone over there? Let's give that a shot. Okay. So the idea here, I want to try to pretend, and this is not really the way it goes, but kind of sort of. We're going to pretend she's talking with me. I'm a busy lawmaker. And I really wanted to engage with this because I think some people in the audience might not have as much experience with this part of telling the story, and I want to try to describe this. So Sarah, you jump up here, and is this thing working? Yeah, it's kind of working. Sure. Okay. This is good. This is good. All right. Sarah's in the house, or maybe you can use this thing. You can try that too. That's fine. Okay. So you've set up this meeting, and I just want to get a better idea for maybe people who haven't had as much experience with this. What does this look like? You're sitting in a room, you're across a desk, who's there? What does it look like, Sarah?
Yeah, sure. So when we go into one of these meetings, like you said, I think the important thing is to kind of set the tone, be able to connect with the person you're meeting with, it, whether it be the lawmaker or the staffer. I think it's really important that when we go into this, we're able to, I mean, I hate to use the word small talk because everyone hates that, but
Yeah.
That's what you want. You want to
Yeah.
be able to kind of get a rapport with them at the beginning.
And can you describe to me exactly what it looks like? Is a lawmaker sitting behind a desk and there's a few of you, and what does it look like exactly?
Sure. So most of our meetings, there is a few of us
Yeah.
because we have so many great people that
That's
come
right.
join us on
Yep.
our Hike the Hills. So yes, typically the lawmaker, actually they don't really sit behind their desk when we go
Okay.
up to DC. They'll kind of join us in kind of family living room style.
Yeah.
Depending on how big their office is this year or
Yeah.
anything like that. But yeah, we kind of are sitting around
Okay.
chairs and couches
Okay.
together.
Okay, it's pretty much the same situation in Washington State, except everyone's holding lattes. It's just a little
There you
different.
go.
Yeah,
Yes.
so, all right, so just so we're clear on that. So I'm going to set this up. I will describe myself as someone who is generally supportive of
Okay.
credit unions, okay? And I'm not the chair, but I'm a member of the Finance Committee that a lot of your legislation is going through. I hope
Okay.
that sets the scene for you pretty well.
It does.
I don't know exactly what issue you're going to be talking about, but I'm John Q. Lawmaker, but you may call me Senator Lawmaker. What's on your mind?
Well, thank you for having us today, Senator. We're so glad to be here with you. I know the weather is not great outside, but we're glad to be inside and having a good conversation with you. I brought a few of my credit union friends. These folks are in your district. They have credit unions in your district. They have branches in your district that help serve the folks that live right there in your community. And we're here to talk to you today about something that is really important for us to be able to serve them better, and that's the Credit Union Board Modernization Act.
Interesting. Have you talked to other people in the Senate, in the House about this issue?
Absolutely, yes. This is something that actually came up last Congress, but we are hoping to move it forward this year. So we have talked to a few different folks. This is an issue that's not really controversial, so we're hoping to gain a lot of support on it.
Got it. Have you talked to people outside of the House and Senate? What other groups, businesses maybe you've talked to?
Sure. So this is a pretty credit union specific issue. A lot of our other issues, we do partner with other groups and build coalitions and things like that. This one just happens to be something that's largely specific to credit unions. So we don't really have a coalition on this one. So we've talked to all of our credit unions in the state, but not necessarily other interest groups for this issue.
Very well. I'm going to take this under advisement. Okay, can we give Sarah a big round of applause? Okay. Sarah, if you wouldn't mind, hang out for 1 second. I just wanted to get some feedback from the room here. What did we like about that? If you've been up on the Hill before, or maybe you haven't, what are some thoughts about how she was able to present herself? I thought that was fantastic, but I wanted to get some other thoughts about why. What was great about what Sarah was doing? Any thoughts out there? In back. Kept it simple. That's good. I like that kind of party. Okay, who else has something? Was there a hand there? Yes.
She was confident and prepared.
Confident and prepared. Those are big, big, big. Doug, what do you got?
Brought it back to their constituents, people that vote for them, and how they're supporting the community.
Got it. Cool, cool. Any other thoughts out there about what happened well, sir?
When you talk about pitch coming from her perspective, she was able to get all of those pitches you were throwing.
Mm-hmm.
The ball, the fastball, the slow ball.
Yeah.
She was kind of hitting the ball back at you.
It was almost like she was listening, right? Yeah, yeah, and has some experience with this too. That's great. Are there some things that maybe could be better? Are there any thoughts out there about different way to frame things, different way to look at this, different way to consider the pitch, or any other things you might add in addition to what Sarah was saying? It was excellent, but what we can always learn, right? What are other thoughts out there? Anything?
The number of members in the area.
There we go.
Credit unions and how much, their assets are, what that means to that community.
If you didn't hear the number of members and the assets they bring in the community, having some more data at her fingertips, that'd be great. That's a very, very good point. Any other thoughts out there? Doug, what do you got?
Don't assume they know the topic inside and out.
Yep.
If they're a little green in the subject matter, you need to be prepared to go into details if they need it.
Okay. Start from the beginning. Yeah, that's a great point. And I know this is not how this looks. This would be how long would a conversation like this be? How long would a meeting like this be generally?
Closer to 15 or 20 minutes.
15 or 20 minutes, right. So there'd be a little more time to flesh that out, but that's a very good point. Other thoughts about ways to craft this, things you might add, things of that nature? Okay.
I have one, I think.
Oh, self-criticism. This is even better.
Well,
Yeah.
I think a personal story.
Yeah.
It goes back to the TVFCU thing where you talked about Peggy instead of, this one is a little tricky, being the board modernization, because it really, there's not anything that impacts the members directly, but indirectly it allows them more time to serve them. So kind of being able to find a personal story.
Yeah, make a connection with a personal story is a huge part of this. Let me do this. Can we give Sarah another round of applause? Thank you. All right. Jump down for 1 second. I'm going to call you back up in a little bit. I wanted to talk about a few things that I think are key parts to a pitch and making it successful, and it kind of looks like this. So in terms of how you pitch your story, I think of three main things here. Sincerity, not sales. This is a key part of how you get into this. And when you heard Sarah talking about, hey, the weather's not great outside, but I'm glad we're inside, and talking about this, again, making that small talk and sincere about it. She's kind of upset that her kids weren't able to go to school today. She could have gotten into that, but at any rate, we're talking about trying to be sincere about this and making that personal example. And I think that's definitely one piece that Sarah recognized here, making that personal example of, okay, the credit union helped this person in your legislative district who had this problem. You can illustrate a situation that lawmakers can identify with. Also, it's the idea of delivering a win for that lawmaker. This is a key part of this too here. So it doesn't matter if the lawmaker's on the left side or the right side, they had to win their job, right? They view themselves as winners. And I'm not saying they're all egomaniacs here, but they do have an ego. And so it's not fawning, but it's some of the soft science here, I think. And I really saw Sarah kind of involving this, some of the small talk that she was involved with there. She's trying to find different ways, and you're trying to find different ways to help give them a win. How are you going to align with their core beliefs? If we had a better idea, if she had a better idea of who I am as the lawmaker person here, you'd say, well, this was in line with something you voted for last year, something along those lines. Those are different ways to help deliver that win here, and really connecting with this lawmaker as a human being to try to look at it as a mutual win. This is something that's good for credit unions, and it's good for you too, Mr. or Mrs. Lawmaker. Now, when you're helping secure that win, that turns into a situation where the lift for them, legislatively, is not that difficult. It's not that heavy. The lawmaker says, you know what? I feel good about this person, right? And here comes the confirmation bias. They're not challenging my beliefs. They're working with me, and we're going to work on this together. This sounds like a good idea. So I will also say this in terms of how the pitch goes. There's a crucial part at the end of the pitch when it comes to closing the deal. And again, I put Sarah in an interesting spot here, and I know that she would have done this, but I just wanted to talk about this and the whole idea of listening and learning. In the last 5 minutes of some of these pitches, that's where a lot of the action happens, and some crucial action in terms of moving yourself forward here. So you may very likely hear from your lawmaker here, okay, if I'm going to do this for you, here's what you can do for me. Reach out to other people in your community. Let's hear about their support. Let's hear about some business owner support. Even if it's just one or two, let's hear about them, because then I, as the lawmaker, can make the argument that this is not just supported by credit unions, this is supported by a broad coalition of people. Wow, even a local bank, right? Some thoughts about that. Now, what you're bringing to the table is not just the political support of the credit union, but others as well, as we help you, Senator Lawmaker, expand your base and get a win here. Now, following up with action here is a critical piece of this as well. So I threw in that piece about me being not the chair, but a member of that committee, because I think that's a very important dynamic here and something to think about. So in talking with this lawmaker, one way to approach it would be something along these lines. Well, I know that you're not the chair of this committee, but you're doing some great work on this committee. Can you help us get in touch with the chair? Can you help make that connection for us? Yeah, I know Stacy. I think I could help do that, right? So you're looking to make that extra connection. Yeah, and I know you're busy. I don't want to harass you, but can we get back together at a specific time or connect at a certain time to make sure this connection is happening? This is about getting on the calendar and staying on the calendar, making sure you make that connection there. Okay, talk to my policy analyst. Great. What's that name? What's that number? What's the email? When are we going to get on the calendar to talk to that person? It could be a situation where you ask this person, can we go to the chair directly? Can we work on that? Could you actually let them know we're doing that so they know, whoever picks up the phone, who we are? So it's taking those next steps there and making sure that you're able to talk to the lawmaker and the staff of the lawmaker to get what you want. So all these pieces of closing the deal are a super important part of this. So with all that in mind, I want to try to go through this exercise once more. And Sarah, you're a gamer. Could you come back up here? I really could use your help. One more time for Sarah. Let's give it up. All right. Thank you. All right. We're going to try the pitch part 2 here. So let me try to go through this one more time. And so I'm another senator on the Finance Committee, not the chair, but I'm someone who has generally not been supportive of credit unions. I'm Barry Banks. Call me Senator Banks. Not quite sure why I've taken that meeting, but you know John Lawmaker, he's a friend of mine, so I thought I'd do it just for him. So what's on your mind? I've got 5 minutes.
Great. Well, thank you for having us today, Senator Banks. We know you are very busy, so we appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to meet with us. We are bringing to you the Credit Union Board Modernization Act. This is a bill that would allow credit unions to meet 6 times per year instead of the required 12. It's something that is important to our credit unions to be able to serve their community members better that are in your district. And we also feel like it's an easy win for you to be able to support our industry because it's not controversial. It's not something that has opposition from any other industry, from particularly the banks. As you know, we kind of go back and forth with them, but this is not something that is going to bring their disdain.
Got it. Why are the banks on board with this? That sounds interesting.
You know, on board is strong, but mostly not opposed is what we're looking for from them, and they are not. They actually already get to meet 4 times per year, and our credit unions who do the same work in their community and serve their members have to meet 12 times per year. So we feel that going to 6 is a great compromise.
Are there other legislators who support this?
Yes, in fact, we have 6 co-sponsors on this bill in our state. So we'd love for you to reach out to them and just see, you know, maybe why they decided to support this legislation and help their credit unions in their community.
And scene. All right, one more time, a round of applause for Sarah. She does really great work. Thank you very much, Sarah, for playing along with me. I know anyone could have done that. Sarah just happened to step up here. That was great. This whole idea of talking to your opponents, maybe that wasn't a super strong opponent. The strong opponent you wouldn't get to talk to at all, but I think this is an important piece of the situation here too, because in looking at this, let me just make sure I jump to the next slide here. Yeah, oops. Here we go. So talking to your political opponents, just some different things to consider here. I wouldn't do this until you've actually talked with lawmakers where you're going to get a better rate of return. Someone's a little more on board with what the credit unions are doing. That's something to consider here. But I think it is a good exercise. It's kind of one of those situations where you can read the room, catch the vibe. Can you deliver this lawmaker a win? And I thought Sarah did a very good job with that. Let me ask, were there any other thoughts? I know we explored this last time around. Any other thoughts about what Sarah did? What could be, what went well with that? Some thoughts about what went well? Any thoughts there? How she did that? I thought it was great overall. Any thoughts? Did you have one? Or is that just a wondering hand? Okay. Any thoughts out there? I'll blaze through. Thank you very much. We'll make sure we'll be talking about this throughout. So I will say this. It's a good exercise in a lot of ways of kind of reading the room and reading what different opponents are saying about this and potentially delivering a win to that lawmaker. You saw what Sarah was saying there about helping make this a win, talking about the co-sponsors that are involved there and the wave of support for this. I also think talking with opponents is a way to help protect some of your supportive lawmakers in looking at this. You can say, I talked with the opposition. In a sense, it relieves them of that work, of that burden of trying to do something like that. You can also learn something too, and I think that's an important part of this as well in talking with some opponents about this. Being open-minded, it really forces you to look at some blind spots and really consider, okay, where can my compromise positions be? So after those 3 Ps at the start, I'm going to give you 3 more Ps to think about here in terms of revising your story, which is a very important part of the process here. So you need to think about changing your message potentially and changing the narrative. You need to consider how the interaction went, what worked and what didn't, and sometimes changing one phrase can make a huge difference. And I was thinking about this on the plane ride out here. I'm so glad that the founders of this organization 100 years ago decided to call this the Tennessee Credit Union League rather than the Credit Union League of Tennessee. Just looking at the acronym, join the cult, right? I mean, that would have been, it just wouldn't have worked, right? It's a very subtle change. You might have gotten a lot of members, right? But maybe not the members you want. So do not do that. That's a bad idea. That's bad branding there. But I brought that up because I think subtle changes can definitely mean a lot. I talked recently with a top lobbyist for a group that represents realtors in Washington State. Very powerful lobby out there, multi-million-dollar lobby. They were in a huge fight over the concept of property rights with some of our state Democrats, and the message wasn't resonating. And Democrats happen to own the Washington State political scene in the state legislature, kind of the flip version of Tennessee here, basically. Strong majorities in the House and Senate, Democrats in the role of governor, attorney general, secretary of state. We got the full Yahtzee going on out there. But realtors ended up having to go back to the drawing board with this concept and reframed it as property doesn't have rights, people do. Again, bringing in that personal piece to this was key. They turned this into an issue of equity and fairness, and that really struck a chord with a number of state legislators. The realtors started working out to build coalitions with low-income advocates, working with some people they hadn't worked with before. They started working with some different environmental groups, which they really haven't worked with before, and expanded their base in that way, found a new coalition, and found some friends on either side of the aisle. They turned this into a story of government accountability, which their more conservative leaders liked, but they also turned it into a story about a system that is accountable to everyone, not just the wealthy, which some more of their progressive leaders like. So changing the message can make a big, big difference, and I wanted to point that out. In terms of media coverage, I mentioned that up there. Yes, you need to be aware of this and monitor it, but most of what you're going to hear is the stuff that's a lot more divisive. Again, people love watching those train wrecks if it's not involving them. But 90% of the work that is happening is not partisan. You will find areas where you can agree. I firmly believe that. And it's your job to determine, okay, what are those areas? What are our compromise points? You need to think about what a 70%, what an 80% win looks like. You're still gaining ground, right? It's a very important part of this. In this process, you're building your coalition. You're letting like-minded community groups know what you're doing. You're following up on recommendations from the lawmakers you talk to, like Senator Banks, right? I also bring up this piece about promotion here because the whole organization has to tell the story from members on up. And I wanted to make sure I highlighted something that the Tennessee Credit Union League was doing that I think is incredible, this whole idea of advancing communities. And I know there's been some work during this conference to actually record some of these stories, some of these testimonies from people who are very supportive of their credit unions and really bringing that personal story home. This is amazing, and this is the kind of work that I'm talking about here. Not everybody is a policy person, right? And that's okay. That's absolutely okay. They can provide detail to your story. They end up providing content or even people power. They can show up on the steps of the Capitol, for example, things of that nature. They can help with organizing. They can call their legislator. They can write a letter. They can write a check. They can also be that example that shows the credit union is advancing for their interest. I'll bring it back to persistence, this last piece here. I think this is something that you're very aware of, that this is a years-long effort. This does not happen overnight. There's a lot of work that needs to go on continually with this. Long-term relationships lead to long-term goals. That's the big answer here. So this is about building up support, building up some of the fundraising work that you do so that credit unions can be a force to be reckoned with, not only in the election cycle, but during any of the big issues that come before Tennessee legislators here. Now, persistence means you continue to survey, as we heard about from Sarah. Thank you for bringing that up. You're surveying a lot of people, and you're doing that continually too. Not just your members now, but the general public, to get the information you need to help track data that's involved for your credit unions so you can track what's going on there in terms of changes in opinion,
You advertise that data, you use it to tell your story, and you use that to your advantage. So I guess just in closing here, I wanted to talk more about this and urge you to find new ways to tell your story and advocate for what you believe in. I think it's important for who we are as a democracy. I think it's what connects us as human beings. So TCUL has been building a story for the past 100 years and doing a great job at it. And now it's time for you to write the next chapter. Thank you very much. This is me. This is who I am. If you want to get a hold of me, you can zip on that QR code there. You'll go right to my website and you can contact me. I'm happy to provide these slides to you personally. If you want me to email them to you, I'm happy to do that free of charge. If you want to talk to me further about any other issues, I'm glad to do it, and glad to take some questions here when we jump into the mingle session here in the next 15 minutes. So thank you very much.